أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to you all for this fourth CILE Granada Summer School. Okay, so as you have seen in the program, the first lecture will be about the discipline of Maqasid, which special reference to ethics. And the point of this lecture is to give you an introduction about the key concepts to better grasp the discipline of Maqasid. So I want to introduce you to this discipline in order to be able to follow the proceedings of the whole week, in order to understand the terminology and to understand what we are talking about when we are talking about maqasid, what we are talking about when we are talking about illa, maslaha, etc. All those concepts that are related to this discipline. And so to better to give you just an overview about this discipline, especially for those who are not familiar with Islamic studies. So we will start with the definitions. So what are we talking about when we are talking about Maqasid al-Sharia?
I'm really sorry. Are we getting the slides?
Yes, you will. I will send them to you, inshallah. So Maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of Sharia. First of all, to be able to understand Maqasid al-Sharia, we should know what we are talking about when we are talking about Sharia. Sharia, epistemologically, means the way, the path through that is leading to the source or to the water source. This is the Sharia in its linguistical or epistemological sense. Now, Sharia in its religious sense or in its technical sense is not very far from this linguistical meaning. Raghib al-Asfahani, he said, Sharia is the path that will lead human being to two things. To purification, because the path that is leading to the water is leading to a source that is able to purify you. So the metaphor here is that Sharia leads you to something that will purify you, not physically, but spiritually. This is one dimension. Another dimension, as Raghib says, is that this essence is able to yarwi. It means to irrigate or to satisfy the thirst. So water is able to satisfy your thirst, your aspirations. Well, it's the same thing for the Sharia. It leads you to what will satisfy your aspirations as a human being. So we have those two dimensions. Sharia is a path that is leading you to something, to an end where you will be purified, not physically but spiritually. Your humanity will be purified from all its all what is obstructing it, and you will be satisfied. Your human aspirations will find their satisfaction with following this path, which is the Sharia. So this is how Raghib tried to define Sharia in its technical sense. Now in the Quran, we find one verse that is mentioning Sharia in this construct, Sharia. We have other verses that is talking about Shira or other derivatives, but one verse is talking about the Sharia, and that verse says, ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ فَاتَّبِعْهَا. And then we placed you on a Sharia, so a way, min al-amr, that is leading to al-amr, so to the religion. A path that is leading to the religion. Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam in his tafsir says that Sharia is a road leading to the goal, because the goal at the end of the day is this so this water or this essence that will purify you and that will satisfy your human aspirations. Now, some scholars have reduced, when talking about Sharia, reduces Sharia to only the practical teachings of religion. Practical teaching, everything that has to do with, with the practical behavior. Why did they do this? For several reasons. One of the reasons is that, when we go back to the verse, God says, ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ. He says, Sharia. We put you on a Sharia to Al-Amr, to the religion, and the religion is that source that will purify you, etc. And he did not say Ash-Sharia, the Sharia, but Ash-Sharia. Nakira. It is Nakira in English. Indefinite. Which means that it's one of the paths, and it's not the only path. And prophets before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came also with shari'as. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. To each community we have given a shir'ah, so a way, which is this, almost the same as sharia, and a method to follow. So here those who have reduced sharia to the practical teachings only, they have noticed this difference. They have said here, sharia, the difference between the shari'as of the prophets is not in the general teachings, is not in the creed, the aqidah, is not in the spiritual teachings and the ethical teachings, but it's only in some detailed practical teachings which differs between one sharia and another. So this is one of the reasons why they have reduced sharia to only the practical teachings, because this is where the sharias can differ. And we found this, for example, Qatada. He is pointing to this when defining sharia. But the later scholars have reduced sharia for other reasons, which we will not get into for the moment. Anyhow, but going back to the Quran, we can say that sharia is not only the practical teachings, but is the religion in its whole. All the teachings of Islam are part of the sharia because they are part of this path that will lead you to this purification, that will lead you to this satisfaction or of the human aspirations, etc. So when talking about sharia, according to the Quranic sense, we can say that the sharia in scope all the teachings, not only the practical teachings, but also the spiritual teachings, the intellectual teachings, which means the creed, etc. So this is the sharia, all the teachings of religion that aims to lead humanity to harmony with its inner nature, the inner nature of man, and with the universe. So God has placed this sharia, this path, so that it would allow man to fulfill his purpose on earth, to achieve this, to achieve this purpose, like I said, this purification, this satisfaction of human aspirations. Well, to achieve this, the Sharia, which consists of all Islamic principles and regulations, aims at realization and preservation of a number of higher objectives. These are the higher objectives. In order to enable human being to fulfill his mission, the Sharia, this path, aims to the realization and to the preservation of a number of higher objectives, which, without which the human purpose on earth and the return to the human nature would be impossible, or at least difficult. So this is Maqasid al-Sharia. Maqasid al-Sharia are the purposes for which Sharia, or Islam we can say, because the difference between Sharia and Islam is just a nuance. It's very nuanced. So the purposes for which Sharia or Islam was revealed in its entity, but also in its specific details. That is the Maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of Sharia. Now, Maqasid and ethics, of course, there is a very narrow link between Maqasid Sharia, the objectives of Sharia, and ethics, because actually Maqasid, or the objectives of Sharia, are the parameter that will define the, can we say akhlaqiyat, ethicality? I don't think this is the right English, but the ethical character of actions. Maqasid Sharia is we can say the parameter that will define whether an action is ethical or not, because the maqasid, the objectives, are considered to be the good, salah or al-khair, and this is why, like we will see, al-maslaha, the benefit or the good, is everything that leads to maqasid al-sharia. So this is why maqasid al-sharia is the parameter which will define the ethical character of the action that is supposed to be followed by a human being. And everything that, so like I said, that leads to the maqasid, to the objectives, is considered as good, as khair, or as salah, or as maslaha, as benefit and as good. And actually, maqasid sharia, objective of sharia, is the intersection of all the Islamic teachings. It's an intersection of the creed, of the spiritual teachings, of the practical teachings. There is where all those teachings meet, and there is where all of those teachings can be, through which all of the teachings can be articulated in human reality. Through maqasid sharia, those teachings can be articulated in human action. So, with maqasid sharia, the human action is controlled or monitored in the inner dimension. We have the fiqh, that is a regulation or a monitoring of human action, في الظاهر, so in its apparent dimension. This is the fiqh, the regulation of the human action, in order to try to harmonize it with ethics in its apparent dimension. But maqasid is the regulation of human action in its inner dimension. And this is why Shatibi says that the sharia, all of the sharia, is nothing but to follow makarim al-akhlaq, to follow good ethics, to follow ethics. So this is about maqasid and ethics. Now, we will try to go fast on all of these points to win some time, because some of them are less important than others. So, maqasid as the basis of sharia, actually, maqasid sharia, the objective of sharia, are, like I said, the intersection of all the Islamic teaching, and have always been there and been noticed by the Muslims from the very beginning in a spontaneous way. So the Muslims have always considered that those objectives are the basis of the Sharia, without even developing any theory about maqasid, or without even talking about maqasid as such, as a concept. It has always been there. Just look at the ijtihad and at the actions of the companions, the Sahaba, and you will notice that when they were dealing with the texts and when they were dealing with the reality, they were considering an overall vision of religion and of the world, and they were considering those objectives, those higher objectives, in their action and in their intellectual production and in the way they were dealing with the reality. And this is why actually the fiqh of the Sahaba is the fiqh that is the richest in comparison with all the other generations. They were developing rulings and principles that you cannot find directly in the text. You know, after the generations, after they need it, when they're implementing qiyas, when we will talk about this, when implementing qiyas and maslaha, they always needed what? Shahadat al-asl. Shahadat al-asl, which means that we need a text that is explicitly or implicitly indicating this ruling. While Sahaba did not do this so often, they just introduced new rulings or new ijtihad without even having shahadat al-asl, without even having a text that is explicitly talking about this. While the later generation were more more afraid of doing this. While Sahaba developed new creative contributions without having them directly stipulated by the text on the basis of their knowledge of Maqasid al-Sharia, etc. We may give some examples later. So this is Maqasid as the basis of Sharia, which means that it was there spontaneously, without any theorization, without even talking about Maqasid Sharia as a concept. And then it started to appear in some of the writings when talking about Maqasid in some rulings and some principles or some teachings of Islam, like Maqasid al-Salat, the purposes of the prayer, etc. We find some books about this, but the point was not to develop an epistemology or develop a methodology of maqasid for ijtihad, but just to show that in the Islamic teachings, in the adoration, etc., there are objectives that are considered by Sharia. This is about maqasid as the basis of Sharia. Then maqasid as a methodological future for ijtihad. Then we had writings starting to talk about maqasid not only as to say that Sharia is realizing objectives in prayers, etc., but as methodological futures to perform ijtihad and to realize maqasid in performing ijtihad. All of you know what ijtihad is. Huh? So the origin of this discipline, of course, can be found in the discipline of usul al-fiqh. In usul al-fiqh, there is where the maqasid as a methodological future for ijtihad started to raise. And especially, of course, in the very beginning, with al-Juwayni and al-Ghazali, etc., it was only in the margin of some other methodological features in ijtihad, like when talking about the illah. You know, so when performing ijtihad, so understanding or deducing rulings from the text. Ijtihad is deducing ruling as understood by those fuqaha, is deducing rulings from the text and implement them in a specific case and specific reality. Well, when performing or when talking about the methodological features of this ijtihad, they, for example, qiyas, which is analogy. So we perform analogy by looking in a ruling that is in a text and to see on which basis, on which rational illah this ruling is based. And this is how they are starting to talk about rational. How can we define rational? Masalik al-illah. What are the conditions of rational, the conditions of illah, etc. And at the margin of this study, they started to talk about maqasid, because al-illah is something that is very related to al-maqasid, because al-illah is a rational that is ending into maqasid. And here, for example, al-Juwayni started to talk about maqasid, about the degrees of al-maslaha, he talked about 5 degrees, and then al-Ghazali talked about 3 degrees, al-daruriyya, wal-hajiyya, wal-tahsiniyya, etc. And here, you know, here we started to see the theoretical or the theorization of maqasid as a methodological feature for ijtihad, but it was very marginal, like I said. Just a few words like this. Al-Ghazali, for example, he talked about it when talking about al-istislah. Al-istislah is the use of maslaha, and he said this is min al-usul al-mawhuma. This is an argument that is not valid. So this is how the first studies around Maqasid appeared. So here Al-Ghazali also talked about al-daruriyat, the degrees of maslaha. He talked also about the 5 big objectives. So hifd al-nafs, the preservation of religion, the preservation of the soul, etc., etc. Well, and then the first actually, so like I said, those scholars actually did develop some theories about maqasid, but not as an epistemological system or as a philosophy of law, not as a philosophy of law in its whole, but just, in the light of understanding the text, in the light of in the light of the implementation of qiyas or istislah, etc., to deduce very specific rulings that are in the text, or to extrapolate on these specific rulings in specific cases, etc. So it was not, a theory about the philosophy of law. It was just, very marginal and in very specific cases. While the first who started theorizing maqasid as an epistemological system and as a philosophy of legislation of law was the Shatibi. He was the first. Shatibi died in 790 of the Hijrah. Who is from here, from Granada, who lived his whole life in Granada. He was the first who theorized maqasid as, like I said, as an overall philosophy of Islamic law, and we may go back to this later. Now, usul al-fiqh and ethics, of course, like I said, like you understood now, maqasid al-sharia is rooted in usul al-fiqh and was born out of usul al-fiqh. And there is a very, of course, narrow relation between usul al-fiqh and ethics, because, in the Islamic tradition, the main source of ethics, and when talking about ethics, when we talk about the text, first of all, because we believe that the human behavior, in order to be ethical, should be in accordance to the divine will. And the divine will that was addressed to the human being in order to be followed, in order to make the choice to follow it, is to be found in the text. And this is why the scholars from the very beginning, their first destination, in order to identify ethics, was the text. And usul al-fiqh is a methodology in order to understand the text and to make sure that human behavior, in human understanding and human behavior, is as close as possible to the divine will. So here we can see the very narrow relation between ethics and usul al-fiqh, because usul al-fiqh at the end of the day is a way that will help you, will make sure that the human action, human behavior is as close as possible by the divine will, so by ethics. Yes, this is about ethics and usul al-fiqh. Now this was the introduction, and we will start now straight away with going into talking about key concepts that are related to maqasid in order to better grasp the discipline of maqasid. Yes? Qiyas is analogy, but we will talk about it further, inshallah. So, first of all, like I said before, Maqasid Sharia, the first debates and the first thoughts about Maqasid in a theoretical sense started around the illah. Because, we need, you know, we cannot just stay by the explicit teaching. We cannot have enough by the explicit teachings of the text, because, you know, reality is much broader than the explicit and the direct teachings of the text. And this is why scholars, of course, they used qiyas, analogy, in order to see in the reality if those specific cases can be extrapolated, or if the specific teaching in the text can be extrapolated to cases in the reality where the text does not address immediately. And this is why qiyas was so important in ijtihad. And illah is central in qiyas. And it's one of the most complex chapters of qiyas. It's central because what will determine if this teaching can be extrapolated to this reality is the illah. Because the illah is the rationale. The reason why this teaching, this ruling was established is the illah. And if we want to extrapolate this teaching to this reality, we have to see if in this reality, this illah, this rationale is there, and if it can be extrapolated or not. So illah is central in usul al-fiqh and ijtihad, and specifically in the qiyas. So we'll talk about illah and hikmah because, like I said, Maqasid started there, the debate about Maqasid. Now, first of all, before starting to talk about illah in its usuli sense, in usul al-fiqh, we have to talk about illah ta'lil af'alillah, the rationale of the divine action. Because actually, the debate on illah in usul al-fiqh was influenced by the debate of illah in ilm al-kalam, in theology. Now, in theology, there is a debate about rationale in divine action. Ta'lil af'alillah. Is there, if Allah does something in the creation, is there a rationale behind it or not? This is a debate that is there in theology that was transposed in usul al-fiqh. But this debate started before that. Actually, the starting point of this debate was the question of human action. Is human action created by God or not? And this debate was initiated by al-Mu'tazila. One of the first problematics that was initiated by Mu'tazila. Is human action created by God or not? Is the human just creating his own action without God being involved in this? Well, the Mu'tazila said human being creates his own action because human being does bad things, does things that are shar, that are evil, and God does not do evil. So God cannot create human action. He does it himself because God is beyond. He cannot do evil. وَالْخَيْرُ وَاجِبٌ عَلَيْهِ. The good is imperative for God, and he cannot do evil. Al-Ash'ari said, no, human action is created by God, and not by human. Human only has the intention to do an action, and this action then is created by God. Why? Because if you say that human being creates his own action, it's problematic on several levels, on level of tawheed, etc. Because that means that there is a power next to the power of Allah. And we know that لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله, there is no possibility for change, الحول, and there is no power than that of Allah. So the one who possesses the power and who creates the things and who does the things really is Allah. And the human being doesn't have any power, but he chooses to do or not to do. Now, this debate generated another debate. التحسين والتقبيح العقليين. Is the mind able to identify good and bad or not? Well, the Mu'tazila said the mind is able to identify the good and the bad. Why? Because the good and the bad are intrinsic things that are in the creation and in action. When I lie, it's bad. And I don't need revelation to identify that lying is bad. Because lying is intrinsically bad. What did Al-Ash'ari say? Al-Ash'ari say no. The mind is not able to identify good and bad. Why? Because good and bad is not intrinsic in things. Things are bad because God said they are bad. But they have no status out of revelation. Which means that how do we know that fornication is bad? Because Revelation said. But is it intrinsically bad? No. It's bad because God said it's bad. So, there are other debates generated from this. We don't have time to go into all the details. But this is the position of Al-Ash'ari. Now, another debate generated from this. Is good mandatory for God or not? Does God have to do good or not? The Mu'tazila said he has. Good is wajib ala Allah. While Al-Ash'ari said no, God does whatever he wants. And he can do and he can do whatever he wants, and he is not asked for that. So it's not mandatory. And from this generated the debate that we are talking about now. Is there a rationale behind divine actions or not? Well, philosophers, or most of the philosophers, said that there is no rationale behind divine actions. Why? So God does not choose his actions because if he would, that means that he is in need of them to achieve perfection. That is a philosophical position, and the argument is called in theology and in philosophy al-iktimalu bil-ghayr. دليل الاكتمال بالغير, which means the argument of perfection by other. What is the meaning of this principle? That is that it's impossible that God that there is a rationale behind divine action, because if there is a rationale behind divine action, if for example God does create and the good is in the creation, that means that God, to be perfect, he's in need of his creation. He's in need. For example, if God created this universe with good and with hikmah, with wisdom, what does it mean? It means that before God have created this universe, he did not have this wisdom. So this is impossible. So which means that God does not choose his action, because it would mean that this implies that God needs this action to be perfect. This is the position of most philosophers. What is the position of Mu'tazilis? They said, yes, there is a rationale behind divine action. God has to act good, but this has to do with human reality and not with divine attributes. Which means that, God creates things, or God creates things with a rational, create things with wisdom, etc. But this wisdom and this rationale, etc., has nothing to do with the divine attributes. This is wisdom for you, human being. But for God, God does not create with wisdom. So wisdom is not one of his attributes. Why? If you say that it's one of his attributes, so they rejected a lot of divine attributes. If you say that it's one of his attributes, that means he is in need of this creation with wisdom in order to be perfect. It's the same logic than the philosophers, but they contradict the philosophers. Any comment? So they said he creates with rational, but it has nothing to do with his attributes. It has to do with human being. So they rejected the fact to describe God with wisdom. because this wisdom cannot be one of his attributes in creation, because that would mean that he is in need of in creation, and he was not wise before having created with wisdom, and this goes against divine perfection. Ash'ari says, no, there is no rationale behind divine action. God does what he wants. Good is not obligatory for him, but just a favor for human being. So good is not an objective order in creation or revelation. In creation, good is not an objective thing. And in revelation is the same thing. It's good because God said it's good. Prayer is good, not objectively in itself, but only because God told us it's good. Lying is bad, or killing is bad, not objectively, but just because God told us it's bad. And some of the Ash'aris use the same argument than philosophers, saying that if good is obligatory for God, it means that he needs his creation to be perfect. And others just said that, like you see on the screen, just said that good actually is a favor from God. It's a favor from God, but it's not obligatory. So which means that good is something secondary. It's secondary. It's there. It's a favor for you, but it has nothing to do with your mission or something like that. And it's not, you know, if there is divine prescription ruling in Islam, and eventually it provides you pleasure, this is not the objective of the prescription, and this is just only a favor of God. And which means that the divine will cannot be identified and established by identifying what is pleasure, what is good, and what is, you know, beneficial for human being. This is not a way to establish the divine will, but only the revelation. And if then eventually this provides pleasure, etc., for human being, this is just a divine favor, but it's not a criterion of knowing the divine will. I know it's a bit philosophical, but if you have questions, you can ask them later. Al-Maturidi, they said something similar than Mu'tazilis, but also similar than Ash'ari. So there is a rationale behind divine will, but also it's not mandatory, but it's just a divine favor for human being. Now, why are we talking about this? Because this had a very big impact on usul al-fiqh. Why? Because for those of you who studied usul al-fiqh, you know that in usul al-fiqh, the most who have written in usul al-fiqh are Ash'aris. Al-Juwayni and Al-Ghazali and many others. And it had an influence. And I think this influence needs some more study. We need to study more the influence of those elements on the impact on usul fiqh, and actually its impact can be noticed in several areas of usul fiqh, and you see it when you study Shatibi, for example, or you study Ghazali, or you study any of those great scholars of usul fiqh. You see immediately the influence of this debate on usul fiqh. For example, Shatibi, sometimes because of this, he almost nullify his whole theory about Maqasid when coming back to his, you know, when his Ash'ariyah comes above, and he almost nullify his whole theory. For example, in one sentence, he said that actually the best way to follow Sharia is not to realize objectives and to realize benefit for human being, but just to be a worshipper without noticing anything and just to be worshiping God. This is a sentence that is actually nullifying his whole theory about Maqasid, while Sharia is not only there for the benefit of human beings. So how can you contradict? How can there be a dichotomy between, worshiping God and looking for the beneficial for human being. It's the same. Worshiping God is beneficial intrinsically for human being. So anyhow, it had a great impact on usul fiqh. And on like we will see now on the illah, etc. Now illah in usul fiqh. Of course, like I said, a lot of those theologians that had this debate about the divine rationale or the rationale in the divine action, etc., had to modify their position on illah when dealing with usul fiqh. And sometimes they were not coherent because of that. So they had a problem in usul fiqh because we need illah in qiyas, in analogy. And we need a rationale. We need to say that there is a rationale behind revelation in order to be able to extrapolate on reality where there is no text. So there is a problem for the usulis, that the mutakallimun that are saying there is no rationale in divine action or in revelation. Well, they find several ways to try to escape from this. And a lot of them said, well, al-illah is not a rationale in itself, is not mu'athir, or not ba'ith ala al-hukm, which means is not the real reason that generates the regulation or the ruling, but it's only amara or ishara or dalala ala al-hukm. It's only a sign that was put by God to indicate that this prescription is based on this reason or this logic. But it's not this logic in itself that generate the ruling. For example, what is the rationale of the prohibition of alcohol? The rationale is the fact that alcohol is enivrant, is muskir, intoxicating, thank you. Intoxicating the mind. This is the rationale. And this rationale, of course, as a non-Ash'ari, I would say, the rationale is the reason why alcohol is prohibited. So is the reason that generates the prohibition of alcohol. Why? Because intoxication is against the preservation of the mind. And the preservation of the mind is something that is needed in order for human being to fulfill his mission on earth. And it is needed in order that the human being can be in harmony with his humanity, etc. Well, the Ash'ari would say that, well, intoxication has nothing to do, there is no logic correlation between intoxication and the ruling and the prohibition. It could have been, for example, that alcohol was prohibited because it stinks, it smells bad. It's possible. God could have said that the rationale of the prohibition of alcohol is that it smells bad. It's possible that for God to do this because he does what he wants, like the Ash'ari says. So, which means that intoxication is not al-ba'ith, is not what is generating the prohibition of alcohol, but it's just a sign that Allah has put to show us that, and has linked with the prohibition of alcohol. That's it. Do you follow this? Okay? So this is a way, they found to get out of this issue of, rationale, etc. So you will not find an Ash'ari, almost like Al-Ghazali, you will not find him saying that al-illah is al-ba'ith, al-ba'ith or al-mu'athir, or al-ba'ith ala al-hukm. He will say amara. Okay? So, illah. The definition of illah. The definition of illah. So, like I said before also, going back to this debate, if you see, for example, that intoxication leads to the preservation of your intellect, and at the end of the day, if by accident this provides you benefit, etc., well, this benefit is just a divine what? A divine what? No, a divine favor. It's just a divine favor. You know, this is the difference between Ash'ari and Mu'tazila. And it's just a divine favor. So, which means that this divine favor, this is not the criterion for you to look for the maslahah and to look for the divine will. If you want to look for the divine will, this is not the criterion, like try to see in the reality what is beneficial, what not. No. Just go to the text, and because the text defines what's beneficial or not, and it's not something objectively there in reality. And if it's there by consequence of applying the text, then it's just a benefit, or just a divine favor, and that's it. And you know, this impact by Shatibi, reading Shatibi, is very big, but we may talk about this tomorrow. So the definition of illa in usul fiqh, the illa is the tangible and measurable attribute on which an Islamic ruling is based. Is the tangible and measurable attribute on which an Islamic ruling is based. This is the illa. It has to be tangible and measurable to be a illa. For example, what is the illa, the rationale behind the fact that when I travel, I'm allowed in Ramadan, I'm allowed not to fast? The rationale is the fact that I'm on travel. You cannot say that the rationale, there is debate about this, but like I said, I cannot enter into all the debates. There is actually the fact that when I travel, there is a difficulty, there is a mashaqqa, there's a hardship. This cannot be the rationale. It is the wisdom, but it's not the rationale. Why? Because hardship is not tangible and it's not measurable. How do you measure hardship? Yeah, but how do you measure it? I'm traveling. How can I know that now this is hardship? I don't know. So this is why the illa, the rationale, has to be tangible and measurable. For example, just give you an example. If you are in the traffic light and it's red, what is the rationale behind the ruling that is saying that you have to stop? No, because it's red. This is the rationale. This is the illa. Red. The light is red. This is tangible and measurable. What is the wisdom behind it? It's because if you cross the red light, you may have an accident. You may have a harm on the material level, the level of your car, on the physical level, etc. This is the wisdom. But you cannot link the ruling with the wisdom, because it will not be. There will be chaos. If you tell everybody, okay, if you think there will not be harm, if you cross the red light, then do it. Then there will be chaos. So we need to have some kind of indibat, consistency, etc. This is the definition of illa. So illa and hikmah, now you have noticed what is the difference between illa and hikmah. Illa is the rationale and is measurable and tangible, and hikmah is something which is linked by the illa. So the illa, the rationale, is an indicator that the hikmah, the wisdom, will be realized. Traveling is an indicator, is a good indicator to say that the hikmah will be achieved, and that is the removal of hardship. Is travel. This is the illa. Travel. When you are travel, the rationale is there. Illa is there. And this is tangible, and this is measurable. Travel is tangible and measurable. Is the removal of hardship. There is debate between the scholars, and it's a long debate. Some of them say travel, المعنى اللغوي للسفر, is just to go out of the city. الظاهرية to say when you're out of the city, you are on travel. But at least this is what?
The majority say 84 kilometers or 85 kilometers.
Yes.
Some cities are that extended.
Yes, when it is 80, then you can. you want to do it reasonable.
But please, let's not debate on the examples, because we will enter in other debates that will generate other debates, and we will not get out of it. Okay, عِلَّة and حكمة. عِلَّة and مقصد. You see, العلة actually can be a specific maqsad, a specific objective, or at least an indicator that the objective will be realized. You see, the rationale of travel is not is a illah, and the relationship between maqsad, the objective, is that this indicator shows us that the maqsad, the objective, will be realized. The objective is the removal of hardship, etc. We will give more examples after this. Okay, this is the relationship between illah and maqsad, and of course the relationship between illah and ethics is also clear, because illah is something that it indicates that the wisdom, al-hikmah, will be realized, and al-hikmah is a value that is searched, or that we are seeking through the Islamic ruling, through the specific ruling. Now, علة اجتهاد مقصد and ethics, مقاصد and ethics. Okay, I try to make it as simple as possible. Recently, we had a seminar which was moderated by Dr. Ghali, very interesting seminar on genomics, and there was a medical doctor who had the ability to vulgarize, very difficult and complex things with very simple examples, etc. And I was, impressed. And I said I have to do the same thing, but I don't think I managed. And maybe one reason is that what he is, illustrating, at the end of the day, are tangible things. Medicine, at the end of the day, it's tangible. Even it's microscopic, even it's complex, at least it's tangible. But here, it's very abstract. And so, Allah musta'an. So we have al-hukm, which is the ruling, okay? And we have in this ruling, let's say, to give an example that is simple and that you can find in all the books of usul al-fiqh, always the same example, the prohibition of alcohol. This is the ruling, al-hukm. And we have attributes in the thing that the subject of the rulings. We have attributes, awsaf. Alcohol has a smell, or let's say wine has a smell, and it's liquid, and it's, there is يقذف بالزبد, there is, foams, and it has a certain color, and you can list a whole number of attributes, and it's intoxicating. Well, some of these attributes are irrelevant. Awsaf tardiyya. Awsaf tardiyya. They are irrelevant, which means that there has nothing. They cannot be. Has no connection with what? With the hukm, with the ruling. We call them awsaf tardiyya. Others are relevant. For example, intoxication. Okay, let's give another example. And there is a hadith that says that it's better for a woman to pray at home, for example. Well, here we have several attributes. And the attribute that is relevant here for this ruling is what the text say it. I don't want to get into details, but we have masalik al-illah, several ways to know what is the al-munasib. The relevant al-munasib. What is the relevant attributes? We have several methodologies for this. Now, we know by one of the methodologies that the relevant attribute here for the woman to pray at home is al-unutha. Al-unutha, femininity. Why? Because it's in the text. Salatul mar'a fi baytiha, etc. It's in the text. Now, so this is relevant. we will come back to this example later. Now we have relevant that المناسب that is relevant directly. المناسب المؤثر, it's relevant directly. For example, when the Prophet ﷺ says, when dinner is served, then you should first eat before praying or before going to the mosque, etc. Now, the fact that the dinner is served, this is a relevant attribute for what? For staying at home and not going to the mosque. This is a direct, المناسب مؤثر. It's relevant directly. Why? Because the text says that this attribute, and that's the fact that their dinner is served, is the reason for this ruling, and that is the fact that you can pray at home and not pray with jama'ah. You see, it's relevant directly. المناسب المؤثر. If the text directly says that this specific attribute is related to this specific prescription, this is المناسب المؤثر, relevant directly. Then you have المناسب الملائم. With all its categories, we will not go into that. But give one example. That is the example that we just gave. No, another example. Yeah, let's go back to the example that we just gave. Let's say that motherhood is a relevant attribute. It's a relevant attribute for the prayer at home. Here, it's المناسب الملائم. Why? Because motherhood is an attribute. It's not directly relevant, but how do we know that it's relevant? Because there is another attribute, and that is the serving of dinner, that is similar to the attribute of motherhood. Because why? Because both attributes are a possible reason for not being concentrated in prayer. If the dinner is served and you will go pray, then you may, just the whole time with the empty stomach, think about, this very nice dinner that was served, and you will not concentrate in your prayer. And when you are a mother, then you leave your young children at home, you may have your mind with them and not in the prayer if you go to the mosque. So we can say that motherhood is a relevant attribute. Why? Because the text not directly said that motherhood is relevant, but said that something similar than motherhood is relevant for this specific ruling, and that is not going to the mosque. And this is the indirect relevant, المناسب الملائم. And then we have an unspecified relevant attribute, المناسب المرسل, which means that it's a relevant attribute. I don't know if I wrote an example here. No, I did not. Anyhow, it's a relevant attribute. This attribute is relevant to the prescription, but there is no shahadat al-asl. There is no text that say that this attribute or a similar attribute, an attribute from this category, is a consequence of this ruling. There is nothing like that. For example, I'll give you an example of the Sahaba. What did they do? They compiled the Quran in one mushaf. How could they know that compilation of the Quran in one mushaf? Or the fact that we may lose the Quran, or the fact that a lot of people that memorize Quran were killed, is a relevant attribute for compiling the Quran, for the obligation of compilation of the Quran in one mushaf. How did they know? There is no text that say that this attribute is a consequence of this ruling. There is no. So it's an unspecified, it's relevant, but it's unspecified. There is no shahadat al-asl. There is no text talking about this. This is the unspecified relevant, or in other terms, al-maslah al-mursala, the unspecified benefit or interest. Now we have the strange, this is a long story, I will not go into that. Then relevant and ijtihad. Truth is relevant I can perform ijtihad in several ways. By identifying the relevant attributes or the illah, this is very important to perform ijtihad not only in understanding the text, here تنقيح المناط, but also in applying the text, here تحقيق المناط. Just quick example. For example, we just said that motherhood is a relevant attribute for. No, we just said that femininity. The text is saying us that femininity is a relevant attribute for not praying in the mosque. Now, the text does not go further than femininity, but by digging into the relevant attributes, and this is doing تنقيح المناط. What is تنقيح المناط? We have femininity as a relevant attribute. تنقيح المناط is to list all the characteristics or attributes of femininity. What do we have femininity? A woman has several attributes. One of those attributes. So we see, are those attributes relevant to the fact that she's staying home, or she better prays home? For example, ancient scholars say, some of them say, why should a woman better pray home than not in Jama'ah in the mosque? Some of them say, they looked at femininity and they said, fitna. Woman is fitna. Okay? So women pray home because, to not disturb the man and, not make him crazy, etc. Okay? So this is, they took femininity and they took this attribute and said, this is هذا المناسب. This is the relevant attribute. Some of them says لأن ذلك حق الرجل على زوجته. This is the right of the man. The man, he has the right that his woman stays home. Okay? This is the right attribute. But the problem of those attributes, in one of the studies, I tried to follow all the attributes that they try to link to the fact that she should pray home. The problem in all of these attributes that if you do tanqih al-manat, you see that actually they are not relevant. And they are tardiyah, they are irrelevant. And the conclusion that we had in this study is that motherhood is one relevant attribute for reasons that I will not explain here. But this is just to give you an example. Okay? And then we have extrapolable relevant attributes and non-extrapolable relevant attributes and adorative relevant attributes. I will pass you the rest because it can become too long and too complex. Tanqih, no. Tanqih al-manat is you have an attribute, but you shake it a little bit so that all the non-relevant attributes drops. Like here, motherhood, like femininity. I take femininity and I shake it good. So all the things, fitna and all the rest that is not relevant, like this, that they fall, and then I purify this attribute and I have the real, precise, relevant attribute. And here, like you see on the slide, with this exercise we come to what? Harmonization of rulings, theoretically, and behavior, practically, with maqasid and ethics. You see? If you do this, take this femininity and you shake it and you come to the right relevant attribute by tahqiq al-manat, you make sure that your understanding of the text is as close as possible with ethics and with maqasid. No, because here we are talking about takhrij al-manat. This is different. Takhrij al-manat, you take the ruling, the situation, and you list all the attributes. For example, why should a woman pray in the mosque? I can list all the attributes. But one attribute is here saying it's femininity. This is the text is saying it's femininity. Salatul mar'a. The text says the woman, the prayer of the woman. So here I left the irrelevant attributes and took relevant. But it's still not munaqqaha. It's still not what? Not purified, not cleared. It's still like you can say rough or raw. It's still raw. Okay? This is the first. This is takhrij al-manat. Okay. Okay. So you see that this exercise of the illah is very important in what? In harmonization of rulings and behavior with maqasid al-sharia. Everybody is following? Okay, now examples. So we said we have al-hukm, the ruling. And this ruling is based on a illah, rational. And this rational is linked with the hikmah, the wisdom that will be realized if following this rational. And this wisdom will generate or realize a field-related objective, Maqasid naw'iyya. And this field-related objective will realize an overall objective, Maqasid amma. And this overall objective will realize higher objective, Maqasid kulliyya. And this higher objective will enable you to perform your mission on earth, the human function. So let's give an example. Okay, let's choose one because we cannot. I will choose one that is very appreciated by Dr. Ghali. Gestional surrogacy. Gestational surrogacy, excuse me. Huh? Is there another? Hey, no. تأجير الأرحام. How do you call it? Okay, let's say draagmoederschap. Okay, everybody understand this? خلاص. Okay, surrogate motherhood. It means that you hire the womb of another mother to carry your child. Okay, this is what is the ruling of this in Islam? It's haram. What is the illah? Is the confusion of lineage. What is the hikmah? The confusion of lineage here. Is it tangible and measurable? Of course, it's tangible and measurable because you know immediately that by implanting a fertilized, how do you call it, an egg or an ovule in another woman, there will be mixture of DNA, etc. The hikmah is what? Why should the confusion of lineage be prohibited? Is a strong feeling of belonging to a family, because a child it's one of the hikmahs, not the only one. A child that is not to really know where he comes, his belonging to the family will be affected. And the field-related objective is offspring, النسل, حفظ النفس, the preservation of nasl, the preservation of offspring. The overall objective is the preservation of family. The higher objective is the preservation of society. And when the society is preserved, well, when we have a strong society, then it will better enable you to perform a mission on earth. Let's take a last example. The higher objective is the preservation of society. And if the society is preserved, then you can, like I said before, the higher objectives are objectives without which you cannot perform your mission on earth. And with a strong society, you can perform a mission. Without strong society, it's impossible or very harsh. Okay, another example is derogation for pregnant women to fast in Ramadan. Pregnant women are not obliged to fast in Ramadan. This is the hukm. This is the hukm or the ruling. What is the illah? Pregnancy. Pregnancy, because pregnancy is measurable and is tangible. What is the hikmah, the wisdom? That is relief pregnant women from hardship. We know pregnancy, if we link this ruling to pregnancy, that this is a possible way to relieve pregnant women from hardship. What is the field-related objective? Facilitation in worship. What is the overall objective? Facilitation and elimination of hardship. What does it mean, overall objective? Overall objective, which means that you can find it in all the rulings. It's everywhere. Here, for example, facilitation and elimination of hardship, you can find it all over the Sharia. This is what we mean by overall objective. Then, what is the higher objective? Is the preservation of religion. If you build all the rulings of religion in a way that it's facilitating and eliminating hardship, well, you preserve religion. Why? Because those who are practicing religion, they will not quit. And those who are not in religion, they will be attracted and not run away. So this is a way of what? Of preserving what? Religion. And by preserving religion, I
I can perform my mission on Earth. So these are some examples. We will go fast. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time, and we are only by the first key concept of Maqasid, and we will go to the second, and it's maslaha. Maslaha, I don't know if I will go into the theological and philosophical debates. I think I will skip this. Maslaha, the good or the benefit, the beneficial. So maslaha and mafsada, definitions. Let's take the definition of Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam. Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam says that in maslaha, it's the pleasure and the means to it, and the joy and the means to it. And the mafsada, so the mafsada is the harm or the bad, the evil, is the pain and the means to it, and the grief and the means to it. So you see, what he means by pleasure is the physical dimension. What he means by joy, الفرح, pleasure, ladha in Arabic, joy, الفرح. What he means is the moral dimension, pleasure, intellectual pleasure, spiritual pleasure, etc., emotional pleasure, etc. So he says that maslaha is the physical and the non-physical pleasure and all the means to it. This is maslaha for Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam. And mafsada is, like you see, the physical and the psychological or intellectual or spiritual pain and the means to it. This is mafsada. Of course, Al-Ghazali, and here comes again the problem of tahsin wa taqbih and the problem of the rationale behind divine actions. Ghazali does not agree with this. Why? You can figure out. Because here, for Ghazali and for the Ash'aris in general, even though Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam is an Ash'ari, well, pleasure cannot be the parameter, because maslaha for Al-Ghazali, it's everything that has to do with religion, regardless of the physics or regardless of the nature or the human nature, regardless of what is pleasure for human and not pleasure. So you cannot use pleasure and joy, etc., as a parameter, because in the Ash'ari view, there is no objective good in creation, in pleasure, etc. So this is why the definition, according to Al-Ghazali, is that al-maslaha is the means to preserve the higher objectives of Sharia and the means to repel what conflicts the higher objectives of Sharia. This is maslaha according to Al-Ghazali. Al-mafsada is all what conflicts the higher objectives of Sharia. So here we have again this debate about divine action and the intrinsicness of good and bad, etc., showing up again in the question of maslaha and mafsada, etc. Now, the categories of maslaha. The scholars divided maslaha in several categories. We have maslaha al-mu'tabara, al-maslaha al-mulghat, al-maslaha al-mursala. Maslaha al-mu'tabara is the accredited benefit or the accredited good. What is the accredited good? Is that what the text has accredited as being, this is maslaha. The text said this is maslaha. And the text can do this directly or indirectly. Directly how? For example, the absence from collective prayer. This is the same example that we gave before. The absence from collective prayer in the mosque when dinner is served. This is maslaha mu'tabara. This is a benefit to not go to the mosque when dinner is served. This is maslaha mu'tabara, accredited because the text has said so. Okay? It can be indirectly. Also, like we said before, the fact that a mother does not go to the mosque because he had a young child. This is also maslaha that it's accredited by the text, but indirectly, like we mentioned before. Then we have a maslaha mulghat, a benefit but it's discredited by the text. It's a benefit, which means, I forgot to say before, or I said it, like Al-Ghazali said, al-maslaha, it's all the means, and even Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam has said it, all the means that lead to the higher objective of Islam, to the realization of higher objective of Islam, is considered as maslaha. And here we have maslaha mulghat. So those are benefits because it's a mean that leads to a higher objective of Islam, but it's discredited by the text. For example, we have three categories here. All what has been prohibited by the text. For example, alcohol. Is alcohol a maslaha, a benefit that lead to a higher objective of Islam? Of course. If I drink and I have pleasure and I have a good, a good chat and I laugh, etc., is this not a maslaha that leads to a higher objective of Islam and the well-being and the brotherhood, etc.? Isn't it? It is. But it's mulghat. It's discredited because why? Because the harm of this is greater than the benefit. Because and actually here we can say that there is no maslaha mulghat in Islam. There is no discredited benefit. But what is discredited? Discredited is the mean to this maslaha, which means that there is nothing in Islam that is beneficial for human being and that has been discredited. This doesn't exist because Islam came for the benefit of human being. In our example, alcohol, to have a good chat and to laugh and to have pleasure, this is the Islam came for this so that the human being will be happy, etc. So that what is discredited is not the maslaha as such, the benefit as such, but is the mean to this specific benefit, and here it's alcohol as a mean to this benefit. But we have other means to the same benefit. Okay? Okay, I will not go into all the other examples because it will take some time. I will send you the presentation and you can go through it. Then we have maslaha mursala. Maslaha mursala, I explained it before, it's an unspecified benefit. And here I want to stop a few seconds to say that for me, personally, my opinion is that if you go to the English literature on usul fiqh and maslaha, I think the most of the writers are mistaking when translating maslaha mursala to common good or to public good or to general good or general interest or general benefit. For me, this is wrong. It's just a wrong translation. Because maslaha mursala in Arabic is maslaha mursala. Maslaha mursala, which means it's not specified. Mursala. Irsal is just, it's left and it was not specified. And so, maslaha mursala can be an individual benefit that is not public and not common. For example, if in my prayer I'm doing tahiyyah, is this maslaha in Islam? Of course this is maslaha. This is maslaha mu'tabara because the text tell me to do so. What is the relation with this and public good? There's no relation. So it's not public. Why restrict it to public? Maslaha mursala is just benefit, that's it. It can be public, it can be individual, it can be etc. So for me, we can have some debate because I know Dr. Tariq Ramadan doesn't agree with me, so he's not here, so I can reply to him already. So it's anyhow, don't tell him when he comes tomorrow.
This is recorded.
He's not watching the videos. Okay, anyhow, so maslaha al-mursala, this is like I explained before. There is no such thing as shahadat al-asl. There is no text that's saying that this specific thing is a benefit or this specific attribute is related to this specific prescription. Like I give the example of al-mushaf. It's the companion when they compiled the Quran in one mushaf. It's a maslaha mursala because there is no text saying that this is beneficial. But how do we know that it's beneficial? Not by one specific text, but by the whole Sharia, by the Maqasid Sharia. The Sharia as such, by the spirit of the Sharia or the overall philosophy of Sharia, is showing us that it's a benefit. This is maslaha al-mursala. So it's unspecified. Here again, we should nuance and say it's not unspecified totally, but it's not unspecified by a specific text, but it's specified by the Sharia as a whole. Okay? How do we know that it's good to compile the Quran in one? There is no specific text, but Sharia as a whole shows that preservation of religion is an objective. Huh? So this is the philosophy of Sharia. Preservation of religion is an objective. So this is a means to preservation of religion. So this means is good. So it's a maslaha mursal. Okay, this may be important. Very fast. The degrees of maslaha. So we have 3 degrees. We have maslaha ضرورية المصلحة حاجية المصلحة المصالح الضرورية المصالح الحاجية والمصالح التحسينية. So we have necessary benefits. Those are means without which my objective on earth cannot be realized, impossible, or very, very difficultly. These are what necessities. Means without which I cannot realize the objective on earth. For example, what is ضرورة? What is something that is ضرورة من الضروريات? Prayer, for example. Prayer, can I realize my objective on earth without having the spiritual link that will allow me to go back to my humanity and see what's happening inside of me by being related to the divine, and so being in touch also with my humanness and being released from the obstacles of life, etc. This is necessary to realize the objective on earth. Life is a necessity. So if there is a mean to preserve life, then it's a darura. For example, if I'm in the desert and there is only pork and I will die if I don't eat, then it's a necessity because life is more important than, because if I don't eat pork, okay, I may preserve my health. But what is better here? Preserve my good health or preserving my life? Okay, so it's a necessity, etc. Needs are less in degree. Without the things, you can perform your objective on earth, but there will be an الحرج أو المشقة, hardship. There will be hardship. Those are needs. For example, work, or for example, I don't know, transportation. I can live without, or I can perform my objective without transportation, but maybe there is a hardship, etc. And luxuries, there's something. If I miss them, then there will be something missing, something just to make it more beautiful, and just something something small will be missing. For example, let's go to the Islamic rulings. We see that in Islam it's recommended to have perfume is recommended, and the Prophet ﷺ loved it, etc. Without perfume, will I be able to realize my objective on earth? Of course. Will there be a hardship? No. So there will be maybe something small missing and something that makes things more beautiful, etc. It depends on the situation, on the reality. For some, Shatibi say for some it's a necessity and it's obligatory, and for others maybe it's a luxury, etc. It depends on the reality. Okay, very, very quick. The higher objective of Sharia, the classical categorization. The scholars categorized the higher objective of Sharia classically into 5. Preservation of religion, preservation of human being, preservation of mind, preservation of offspring, and preservation of will. This is the category, or the order that was established by Al-Ghazali. Now, this is the classical categorization, almost accepted by the most scholars, by the most ancient scholars. Some of them argued that no, we should add and we should classify differently. Ibn Taymiyyah argued that several things are missing, etc. But the general trend is to accept those 5. And some even said that this is ijma', this is consensus. And today, the modern scholars of Maqasid have a debate around this. Should we add? Can we add? Are we allowed to add, or is there a consensus, or can we not add, etc.? It's long, and I wanted to detail the debate, of course, but I don't have the time. But my position is that this is just a historical categorization, and we should add and we should restructure the whole thing. And of course, like I said, I will not go into other details. And for me, it would look something like that. it would look like this. Okay, that's it. Okay, بارك الله فيكم وأقول قولي هذا وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.